Correspondents 1 Hour. And with us, Craig Kapitas of Quartz, the Atlantic's business website. Also is Anne Bagger-Murray of the International Herald Tribune, freelance reporter Ulrike Kolterman, and France 24's very own Virginie Hertz. Welcome to all of you, The World This Week, where you can always join the conversation on Facebook and on Twitter. You can find us at François F24. Is history repeating itself? The air raids and rocket launches this Friday hark back to 4 years ago, after the U.S. had voted and ahead of an Israeli election. Tension with Gaza escalating into an invasion of that Palestinian territory. So far, no ground troops on the part of the Israelis, but the sound of air sirens in Tel Aviv, a first since the 1991 Gulf War. Rockets have also landed in the Jerusalem area. On Wednesday, the escalation became very real with the assassination of Hamas's top military commander. Israeli authorities releasing the video of the missile strike that blew up Ahmed Jabari's car in Gaza City. Anne Bagger-Murray, when they released this video, they knew that was going to raise the ante and the stakes.
You have to believe that what you mentioned is history repeating itself. The context in which this happens is slightly different than the last time it did, but there is one salient point of convergence, and that is it's right before an election. Mm-hmm. So you have to believe that there was a domestic political component to this, that the government in power wants to flex its muscles, wants to build support for its view of the world, which is unquestionably, and there's some truth to this, that Israel is under siege and Israel must defend itself. I was struck by the fact that this is the kind of video you wouldn't have seen 4 years ago. We didn't have the technology. This was a surgical strike against a key person in Gaza. That perhaps is the biggest difference between what's happening now and what happened 4 years ago.
Virginie?
And maybe another difference, too, is that the Arab Spring has happened meanwhile. So that means that all the neighbors of Israel have another behavior or might have another behavior. And I'm thinking particularly on, with Egypt and with the influence of the Muslim Brothers that might change the attitude of the Egyptian government.
Well, let's pick up on that point. The new leadership in Cairo, which had no longer been sealing the border there, in a piece in the Daily Beast, Hussein Ibish, senior fellow at the American Task Force on Palestine, looks at an Egypt unwittingly drawn in to internal dynamics on the part of Hamas. He writes, the increase in rocket attacks against Israel in recent months is linked to an internal power struggle within Hamas, an attempt to shift the decision-making authority within the organization to the political and military leaders in Gaza and away from the Politburo scattered throughout Arab capitals. Again, when you say who started it, it's never an easy answer to that question.
Well, unfortunately, there were easy answers from the U.S. and also from Merkel saying clearly this time Hamas is responsible. But I'm not sure if this is really helpful because you can never say who started it first. You can also say that Israel attacked a new tunnel and before there was another event and there was another event. So it's not very helpful to say who is responsible for it. It's just a nightmare that this happens now as we have Syria on the same time. So the world is not even prepared to have yet another conflict. And there were articles saying, is this war number 8 in Israel? And it looks very, very likely that there is a huge escalation of violence.
There seems to be nobody toning down the rhetoric at this point, Craig Kapitas.
No, and it's exacerbated by the fact that you essentially have 3 countries or countryettes within this small slice of land. You have Gaza, you have Israel, and then you have the folks on the West Bank, the remnants of the PLO. And none of these people get along. These are the ultimate bickering children of Abraham. And when we always get to the knotty question of Israel and its relations with the Palestinian world and the Arab world, we always backtrack. We're always very cautious because you say something wrong and everyone's going to come down on you. I think the most significant thing here is, remember a few weeks ago, the Emir of Qatar went for a visit, and we were all kind of smiling. Oh, yeah, this could be something good. Well, there goes that idea out the window. I think what this again shows, as much as we don't like to admit it, talking truth to power, as the expression goes, there is no solution there. And there probably won't be until both sides stand across from each other and kick the living tar out of each other. Because so many people, for so many years, have tried it. And I really thought that Qatari visit was going to do something. It obviously did not. Who else is left to go there? Barack Obama, he's got more problems back at home. He's not going to go.
Which brings us back to the
to that extent.
which brings us back to the point that Virginie was making about Egypt and how is Egypt's president going to react? Well, on the one hand, he's got his own public opinion to worry about, and there's plenty of public anger in Cairo against Israel. These images from a Friday demonstration in the Egyptian capital. Mohamed Morsi talking tough in public.
Stop this farce. Stop the bloodshed. Otherwise, you won't be able to face up to our anger. The anger of the people and the anger of the leadership. The Egyptians have always loved peace.
But when he dispatched his prime minister to Gaza earlier on Friday, what Palestinians heard was a mixed message.
The revolution will not spare any efforts in order to stop this aggression and achieve a sustainable truce.
All right, so Egypt will not spare any efforts to exert every effort in order to stop this aggression and achieve a sustainable truce. So Egypt feeling that somehow it could still play broker.
I think probably every country in the region sees that as its eventual role. It's certainly Egypt, possibly Turkey, maybe even Tunisia. I understand Tunisia is sending an envoy to Gaza tomorrow. I mean, this is the inevitable follow-on from taking care of your domestic political situation, finally determining your own government. Then you want to be a player regionally and even internationally. Turkey's a bit further along the continuum. Egypt is getting there. I think they all want to feel as though they have some influence and they can be a broker in the region. Having been so aligned with the rulers in Gaza for so long, it's hard to see how they could be an honest broker. But I think it's a real temptation for some of these countries to assert themselves on the world stage in this way.
Ulrike Coleman?
I think Egypt is in a very tricky situation now because the Muslim Brotherhood, they were always criticizing Mubarak for the peace he made with Israel. And now Morsi is in the position that he wants to be a regional leader. So he can't really break the peace deal with Israel because if he does it, he will lose support from the US and from the West. And on the other hand, he's under pressure from his own brotherhood from the base, who obviously want him to be very aggressive against Israel. So now he's realizing that he's in power, that it's not as easy as when he was just criticizing Mubarak for making peace with Israel.
That's
And
what
the
being a
IMF,
player means.
he's got to worry about the IMF. He's negotiating a loan package with them. But I mean, but again, let's be real. Do you think, Bibi Netanyahu is going to sit down, let alone listen to any entreaties coming from Morsi? I don't think so.
All right.
Yeah, just one last thing about this topic. What struck me too is that once again, there is no single voice coming from the European Union. There were condemnation on the side of the British, particularly, and some others European. But France, for example, condemned Israel's attitude a bit less than the others. So there is no single attitude. And again, it's a lost occasion, I would say.
Can I ask a question? I'm curious. Do you get there is Muslim Arab fatigue in the United States? Do you get the sense that this is happening now here in Europe as well? We just don't want to know about what's going on in the Middle East anymore.
I think people will wake up again now that this is happening. I mean, it's always up and down, up and down. You feel like it's going in circles.
I'm not sure there is a fatigue, at least from the government and from the French president. He's trying to push on to have initiatives on these topics.
The colonial ties too. I mean, France and Tunisia. That I think creates probably a
neighbors.
greater sphere
It's
of
not far
interest
away.
here.
Just on the other side of the
I just don't see
Mediterranean.
Europeans as engaged by what's been happening over the past 48 hours as I have seen them engaged in the past. That's just a perception.
Is either an Islamic world fatigue or perhaps, sadly, a fatigue with the situation between Israel and the Palestinian territories.
But also a weakness of foreign policy on a European level.
Yes.
Well, let's move on to some of the other topics here on the world this week. And let's go to China, where the curtain has fallen on a once-in-a-decade changing of the guard.
Dear comrades, the 18th Congress of the Chinese Communist Party was a resounding success, thanks to the joint efforts of all delegates.
The outgoing president signing off and leaving the way for a 7-member Politburo. It would have been 9 members, but the 2 most reform-inclined high-ups got left off the list. The new man at the top sending mixed messages, it seems, promising on the one hand to tackle corruption, but also promising continuity.
To be turned into iron, the metal itself must be strong. Our responsibility is to work with all comrades in the party to be sure that the party supervises its own conduct and enforces strict discipline, effectively dealing with the prominent issues that we face. We need to earnestly improve our style of work and maintain close ties with the people. By so doing, we will ensure that our party will always be at the core of the country's leadership, advancing the cause of Chinese-style socialism.
Interesting to see that turn of phrase, to be turned into iron, the metal itself must be strong. It's funny, we're in 2012 and we're still listening to leaders saying "dear comrade" at the beginning of their sentences.
Yeah, well, you know, it's a perfect metaphor. China is a battleship, and you don't turn battleships on a dime. And I think whereas this guy is probably saying all the right things that the Westerners want to hear, and even the reform-minded interests in his own party want to hear, I think the message you can believe is the one of continuity, the one of we're going to reinforce the party, we're going to make sure we exact discipline. After all, it's been working. Now, there are some landmines waiting for them. China has got a big aging population problem. It's got an unsustainable rate of inflation. It is not managing its economy in a sustainable way for the long term. But I'm not sure that that's a message that plays well at a change of power ceremony. People want to be reassured, and especially the party apparatus wants to be reassured.
Now, in a column in the International Herald Tribune, China watcher Jonathan Fenby highlights Xi Jinping's non-committal stance to reform. He says this makes him symbolic of a leadership that has evolved from the wild one-man adventurism of Mao Zedong to the equivalent of a secretive conservative corporate board that keeps itself aloof from public scrutiny, does not account for its decisions, and counts on a flow of good numbers to gain acquiescence. Craig Capitas, when you think back to when reform was needed when you were covering Russia, or the Soviet Union, excuse me, in those days, I guess Xi Jinping, and it's been said, wants to really avoid being the Mikhail Gorbachev of China.
And that definition of modern corporate Politburo, that was always the definition of what a Politburo was. The fellows who are running China are strict, conservative, communist of the most doctrinaire type.
But you could say the same for Gorbachev, a guy who had never been outside of the Soviet Union.
That's absolutely true with Gorbachev, and which was proven when he went back to the Kremlin after he had been arrested and set out in the streets. But that aside, these fellas still mention Mao Zedong's name in speeches. You know, in the Soviet Union, the last person to really mention Stalin with a smile on his face was maybe Khrushchev once, you know, Brezhnev, you know, a couple of times in passing. But these guys, there's still a picture of the great leader Mao in front of the Forbidden Palace. So the Politburo is very much alive. You know, it's iron fist. They're going to keep running like they always were.
Ulrike Kohler?
Probably it's
forever.
True. And it would be nice to see some women, but
exactly. And Mao said that the women are carrying half of the sky, but there is no single woman.
Exactly.
But,
Except his wife, who's that famous singer.
Of Xi Jinping.
Yeah, Xi
So,
Jinping, yeah.
But just about China and about democracy and elections and so on. I remember being in Cuba and meeting a Chinese journalist, asking him, "What do you think? Don't you think that China should have elections like in Europe or in Western countries?" And he said, "Well, actually, no." And why? He gave me two reasons. The first of these reasons was that when you have elections, the persons who are elected have a short-term view and promises things, and then finally his only goal is to keep the power. That was the first reason. The second reason is that he said the other problem is that even you say that you have change in Europe or in Western countries, but actually when you see the political class, they are all the same for years and years. And actually, I think at least in France, it's true that you see the same leaders for years and years.
Really. It's interesting. There have been plenty of biographies written about number one and number two. And number two, Li, I'm going to get the name wrong, but Li Keqiang. There was a wonderful passage in the piece that appeared in the IHT and in the New York Times about how during his university years in Peking, he and his buddies would get together. I believe it was him. He and his buddies would get together after they turned off the lights in the dormitory, and they'd talk about these wild concepts like the rule of law. And they were having these wonderful dorm room discussions like we all do. And then later on, he asked his parents if he could study in the United States, and they said, "Nah, you can get whatever you need here." And that was almost there was a moment there when it looked like he had, and this is cited as his great broad background, feeding the hopes that he will eventually come out as a reformer as he was when in his 20s. It ain't going to happen. I predict it right now. It ain't going to happen.
I think there are some positive signs. I mean, already they reduced the number of seats from 9 to 7, as you said. I think he didn't speak only of comrades, but he said colleagues as well, which are small signs, but maybe it's going into the right direction. And he's been tying knots with he's been in relationship with the US for years. They know each other. So it's a little bit who took over, no one knew him because he has refused to take a stance. But
still an unknown quantity. Baby steps, certainly not a great leap forward for now. When we come back with The World This Week, we're going to be looking at the relationship between France and Germany, and also the latest on the Petraeus sex scandal. I wonder how much of sex is there and how much of a scandal is there. Stay with us.